very warm welcome to you to our lecture series by eminent people. We started this lecture series a year back, and in this series we've had Dr. Anil Kapotkar, Ambassador David Maloney, David Brewster, Herbert Dieter, Maruf Raza, and Major General Vinod Sehgal, who have come here and delivered their lectures. Today, we are very fortunate to have with us Ambassador V.S. Prakash, former Ambassador of India to Brazil, Uganda, Rwanda, and Burundi, and former Consul General of India in San Francisco. This lecture is organized in association with Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India, and the Goa University. I would like to thank both of them, and I would like to especially thank Ambassador Prakash for accepting our invitation to deliver this lecture here today. He will be speaking on adding content to cordiality, the transformation of India-Brazil relations in the last decade. We are very happy that he has decided to speak on this very important topic. India's interaction with Latin American and Caribbean countries, particularly with Brazil, has enhanced over the years. Brazil and India have also shared historical ties as a result of the Portuguese Empire. More recently, Brazil and India have cooperated on a multilateral level on issues such as international trade and development, environment, reform of the UN and UNSC expansion. Brazil's trade relations with India have witnessed a tenfold increase in the last decade and expected to reach $15 billion by 2015, with exports of $5.04 billion and imports of $5.58 billion, close to 10 times increase in the last 10 years. There is a growing cooperation between the two developing powers in various fields, including agriculture, science and technology, energy, education, defense, and environment. I'm sure Ambassador Prakash will throw more light on this subject. Please allow me to introduce Ambassador Prakash to all of you. Ambassador Prakash at present is a visiting professor at Jamia Millia University in New Delhi since January 2013. He is also a visiting scholar at the Foreign Service Institute of India. He is writing a book on the transformation of India-Brazil relations in the last decade, which is also the topic of this lecture today. As an ambassador and as a professional diplomat, he has lectured extensively in universities and continues to engage with think tanks and universities. He has numerous publications and has contributed more than 80 columns on diverse issues relating to lifestyle, culture, management, and technology. He has extensive experience dealing with United Nations and multilateral organizations with India's immediate neighborhood, USA and Brazil. As head of the United Nations Division and as alternate representative to the IAEA, he has interacted with the UN system, including on issues of conflict resolution, terrorism, peacekeeping and peace building, nuclear energy, non-proliferation, human rights and human development, and specific regional situations. He is also involved in diplomacy concerning reform of the UN Security Council and structural issues related to the UN reforms. He has dealt extensively with the issues of terrorism, including international legal conventions and instruments on combating terrorism. We are also very happy to have with us today Joint Secretary, Public Diplomacy, Ms. Diva Ganguly Das. She would be also making a short presentation on public diplomacy and what their role is and what they have been doing. But before that, I would like to invite Aparajita to say a few words. Thank you very much, and please welcome Ambassador Prakash.
Good morning, everybody. We are located in Goa, and we all know the historical linkages Goa has through Portugal with Brazil since the 16th century. And currently, the last decade and a half, we just now mentioned, we have been seeing a great deal of transformation between India's relations with Brazil. We have identified common goals, common aspirations, and we have similar views on a number of issues on international relations. And given the fact that we have similar capabilities, and also there's a great deal of excitement both in India and Brazil about each other. That sort of goes beyond the traditional stereotypes with which we have seen them. We are indeed today very privileged to have Ambassador Prakash with us, a serious practitioner of the Indian foreign policy, and he has been a close witness to this transformation which has been undertaken for the last decade and a half. I'm sure that his reading and understanding of this evolving relationship will provide us with a new perspective. Along with Ambassador Prakash, we have today Ms. Riva Ganguly Das, who is currently an expert and the head of the Public Diplomacy Division. I would like to welcome both of them to Goa and to the ICG, and may I request Ms. Das to make her presentation. Thank you.
Very briefly, I'll tell you what public diplomacy is all about. Today's lecture is actually a public diplomacy initiative of the Ministry of External Affairs. We feel that there is a need for us to engage with domestic audiences. External Affairs has always been, dealing with foreign audiences. That is our mandate. We've always had an external publicity wing, as we called it. But in modern times, we feel that foreign policy touches everybody in many ways. People have relatives working abroad. People work for foreign countries. There are many ways in which there are many more stakeholders in the conduct of foreign policy today, and that is the reason why we do these outreach events with state governments, in these states, so that there is a better understanding of what MEA does. So this is basically our mission statement, where we are engaged. It talks about engaging with domestic as well as foreign audiences. These are the main activities that we do. We commission books on India, we commission documentaries, we help we have a magazine of our own. It's 25 years old, it comes out in 14 languages. We do a lot of outreach. Today's event is a part of our outreach activity. We do seminars with CII, FICCI. We've been organizing the International Relations Convention since 2011. This is the first time in India that all international relations scholars converge in Delhi, and over 2 to 3 days, all aspects of Indian foreign policy are discussed. We are also working to sort of form an organization, a pan-Indian organization of IR scholars, so that the study of international relations gets encouragement. We feel that as MEA, we have a natural relationship with the IR community, and we make a lot of effort to nurture this relationship so that research which gets done in IR is relevant to MEA, and there is a sort of synergy between MEA and IR community. The External Affairs Minister has himself been visiting a lot of state capitals to deliver what is the public policy lecture, and we find that state governments have been very, very receptive to this. This is the activities that we do in states. These are some of our books. Almost all our books are published in 5 UN languages: Arabic, Russian, Portuguese, Spanish, and English. Some of our books, like we have a book on yoga, because yoga is so popular. We published it in 9 languages, and there is no such book in India which is on yoga, which is available in 9 languages. We are very active in the digital sphere. We call it digital diplomacy. As you can see, we are on Facebook, we are on Twitter, we are on YouTube. The 3 main initiatives we have is ASEAN India, and India Africa. This is our website. If you go to our website, you will find that, for instance, Ambassador Prakash's lecture will be on our distinguished lecture series, and all the previous lectures are also available there. We find that there are lots of downloads from that, because obviously people are interested in having to know what India says on important foreign policy issues. You'll find an icon there called National Archives. All MEA files which have gone to the National Archives, which is 20,000 files, are now in National Archives. If you go to the search engine and type in the name of the subject that you want to see, the files will turn up. The form in which you have to apply for National Archives, to have access to the file, is also there. At present, 58,000 files have been declassified. So it's a massive number. We have a huge number of files to be declassified, but it is a public diplomacy effort that we are trying to do this as soon as possible, so that our research community gets access to files. This is our Facebook page. We have a large Facebook community of 114,000 people. If you go to the Facebook page today, you will find a photograph of what was happening in Goa yesterday, the lecture that Ambassador Prakash gave yesterday at St. Xavier's. So we try and project what India does, India's engagement with the world. As you can see, it says it advancing India's conversations with the world. So our engagement, what our missions do, what we do in effort to enhance our relationship with the world, that's what we put on our Facebook page. This is our YouTube page. We've made more than 340 documentary films on all aspects of India as well as India's bilateral relations. So you'll find the films there, and we make films in many languages. Almost all our films are available in Arabic, in Russian, in Portuguese, Spanish. We also have films in Vietnamese, Pashto, Dari, Bengali, Tamil, Sinhala. So the playlists are all there, and if you go to the YouTube page, which is Indian Diplomacy, you'll find all our films. We've put in more than 1,000 films on YouTube. This is our Twitter page. We've got more than 100,000 followers, 108,000 followers actually. Whatever ME is doing as part of its soft power projection, as part of, because it's not only the official part of our relationship which gets projected in the External Publicity Division's website. Whatever we do apart from that, especially what our missions are doing, good stories about India which would interest investors, foreigners who are interested in India are all put here. This is India is initiative of ours, which is a photography competition. These photographs are all part of the competition and a video competition. So we do this competition where anybody can submit a 3-minute video, and we have partners in Google. Google is our partner to do this. We got more than 2,700 films, photographs last year. From 61 countries, the reach is over 175 countries. This is basically a branding exercise that we do through the Public Diplomacy Division. And if you go to these pages on Google Plus, for instance, if you go to Google Plus and type in India, our India Is page will appear as one of the top pages that you should follow. This is the website of India Is. As you can see, 550,000 hits on the photography channel. This is our Pinterest page where the photographs have been put in little folders, and these are absolutely amazing photographs. These are not professionals. These are people like you who have just taken photographs and submitted them for competitions, and there are very nice prizes for the competitions. This is the Twitter page. This is External Affairs Minister giving away the awards. As you can see, there's a very young woman who's getting the award. India Africa is a very unique initiative of ours, where we have tried to use social media to get young people from India and Africa to engage with each other. Africa, there is a lot of stereotypical image of Africa that we have, and the objective here was to get Indians and Africans to compete online. We have a lot of competitions online. If you visit our website and our Facebook page, you will see the competitions. There are very nice prizes. And it's absolutely a campus-based activity. Our teams go to campuses in Africa. We've got knowledge partners in Africa. And it's a fun activity with which we try to engage the youth. This is all India Africa. This is our magazine, India Perspectives. You can see the number of languages in which it is issued. These are some of the covers. It's also available online. This is the website of the India Perspectives page. The website has it in 5 languages. So you can go to the website and see this, and it's got animation and a lot of new features. This is a very unique initiative of the MEA. This is an application, a free downloadable application on iTunes. You can download this application on your Android or your iPhones and iPads. And everything about MEA, which means our press releases, statements made by the ministers, interviews, and visa, passport, all kinds of information and links with our missions are all given in this application. So if you have it on your phone, so if you are traveling, you are lost somewhere and you need a passport, you can just click and go to the form. It's available with you. And as you can see, I've highlighted the Public Division logo. India Perspectives is available there, and there is an interesting quiz on Indian foreign policy, and you can participate in the quiz and win prizes. We are perhaps the only foreign office in the world to have developed such a detailed application, and within days of releasing it, it was already top of the charts on iTunes, and it's got hundreds of downloads, and it's really a people-friendly initiative, which brings Ministry of External Affairs closer to the people. So this is basically what we do in the digital sphere. Thank you, and I hope you visit some of our digital initiatives. Thanks.
Friends, I am very happy to be here, first of all for my own reasons. What I intend to do today is to really think a little bit about Brazil. As you have heard, I have completed my assignment in Brazil, but I'm still exploring it, I'm still thinking about it, and I think one place in India where it would be natural to engage with people a little about Brazil is this place in Goa. So I'm very happy that I'm getting this opportunity with the help of the Goa University and the International Center and the Ministry of External Affairs to have a dialogue with you both here in this room and outside this room about Brazil. But why Brazil? Why should anyone really be interested in Brazil? I would agree if you say that, supposing I were talking about Pakistan today, then of course I don't have to ask or answer the question why Pakistan. 50% of our foreign policy revolves around Pakistan in a sense on a day-to-day basis. And almost every Indian not only has an interest in Pakistan, he has a view on how foreign policy with Pakistan should be conducted. For those of us in the Ministry of External Affairs, it's a headache. Everybody has a view on what is wrong with our policy with regard to Pakistan. China, a little less so, but again, one doesn't have to ask the question, why should we have an interest in China? We have to, it's self-evident. Similarly, the United States and maybe one or two. Brazil is not in that category. It is not a headache for us. It is not a neighbor. In fact, it is very distant. It is not a traditional great power like China, United States or Russia. It is not a country with whom our relations are so substantive, so multifaceted, that there are people in each home, or at least people in cities, who would know something about it. But still, at the end of this lecture, my effort will be to see whether some of you would agree that it is an interesting country. I'm not saying that it is the most important country for India, but it is an interesting country in some different ways, in some different dimensions. And this is what I intend to explore with you. Before I proceed, I think I must tell you about my own so-called discovery of Brazil. You know, we talk of Columbus discovering the North America, and we talk of Vasco da Gama discovering or landing in India. Similarly, Cabral, the man who discovered Brazil. For me too, in a sense, only 4 years ago, 5 years ago, Brazil was a very accidental discovery. Because in the foreign service, I don't know what impressions you have about the Indian foreign service, but it is not necessarily the case that someone who is fluent in Portuguese, who has been in Lisbon or in Brazil earlier, some countries do it. Some countries have a track of specialization in one particular area or language. We, fortunately for us, or unfortunately, I don't know, but I think fortunately for us, we don't have that consistent specialization in a particular area. My colleague Reva, who is here, she went to China, her one qualification being not knowing Chinese. So similarly, I was selected to go to Brazil, my qualification being not only not knowing Portuguese, but I had been in all the other continents. I had been posted in every other continent except South America. So ultimately, I think it's only my karma which took me to Brazil from the United States. And when I landed in Brazil, the first few weeks were a little disorienting. Now, how many of you have been to Brazil? I think Aparajita, Tabre and Newsom. Okay, 3 of you. All right. Because I'm very lucky to find some people who have actually been to Brazil here. Normally, you wouldn't find it so. But it was disorienting in this sense that normally today in a globalized world, we call it a global village, you land anywhere. You land in Munich or you land in Shanghai. You will always see some Indian restaurants. In most places you see some gurudwara, some temples. As you see, you will go and see some boards saying yoga center, music center, pictures of Katrina Kaif or somebody, because the Hindi movies will be running everywhere, simultaneous releases. So there is that kind of a certain image of India that you come across when you travel in many, many countries in the world. Not all, but in most countries in the world. And certainly for me, certain sites I thought that India had, in that sense, there was a global imprint, a footprint of India everywhere. The other thing was that you normally see Indians or people of Indian origin or Indian communities. Speaking for myself, before Brazil, I was in the west coast of the United States, and there were more than 1 million. I mean, there were nearly 1.5 million people who were the jurisdiction of the consulate. I had been in an earlier avatar. I was the Deputy High Commissioner in Colombo. And all of Sri Lanka, in a sense, is of course people of Indian origin. But even if you were not to want to say that for political reasons, at least all the Tamils, the entire northeast of Sri Lanka, and the Tamils are more than 12% of the population. They are people of Indian origin. I was ambassador in East Africa at one stage, and there were something like about 85,000. It was the only country, Uganda, from which Indians had been expelled and they had come back. So the familiarity of having the Indian community as one of your constituencies is there for us generally in diplomats. When I was going to Brazil, I was shocked to find that the people of Indian origin, not Indian origin, I should say Indians in Brazil are in the range of 2,000. Most of them it's not over 2,000. This is not the kind of figure that we are used to. We are at least used to 50,000 people, if not a few million. There are nearly 25-30 million people of Indian origin all over the world. So in that sense, again, it was different. And then, in the first few weeks, I realized that most people were, I mean, my wife normally dresses in a sari, so it was a little different for her. But for me, most people were always talking to me in Portuguese. And a lot of people looked like me. And many people looked different. Some people looked Japanese, some people looked Arab, some people looked like me, some people looked like European. So there is no such one thing as Brazilian look, but everybody was talking to me in Portuguese. And when I started telling them, after having a few words of Portuguese, that I can't really speak in Portuguese, now for other Portuguese, generally the reaction, but why not? Why not? Why don't you speak Portuguese? So it is a country in which it is such a sense of self-containment and a universe in itself of different people, but all speaking Portuguese, and being surprised that there are people in the world who don't know Portuguese. This experience I didn't have it in Europe or in Moscow. I don't know so much about China. So these were kind of disorienting experiences, as I say. So since then, and this is nearly 4 years ago, I came to the realization that purely in cultural, sociological, psychological, and shall we say social anthropological terms, Brazil is a very interesting country in which the music, the cuisine, the thinking process, the attitudes, the aptitudes all seem different to me. And please let me say it once again that as an Indian diplomat, like all my colleagues, I've served in very many different countries. So just being a different culture doesn't surprise you. I lived in Germany, lived in Austria, lived in the US, lived in Africa. But Brazil was in a sense different. And as I, over the last few years, tried to understand Brazil a little more, the thing that really struck me is that despite this strangeness, despite these very, very different facets of Brazil, so different from us, there are extraordinary commonalities and convergences between Brazil and India. They're extraordinary. And let me start really by pointing a few. I'm not going to do a PowerPoint presentation because I thought, facts and figures and statistics is not what I intend to do. You can all look it up for yourself. So basically, I want to share a perspective with you, convey a sense of my own experience and engage you, and therefore I'm not going to be very precise. But let me start by saying, what are these extraordinary commonalities between Brazil and India? First, the brute facts, objective facts as we call it. We know in India that we are a very large country. We all know that we are a large country. But in Brazil, it is 2.5 times the size of India. So that's really enormous. It's the 5th largest country in the world. Some of the largest countries in the world, like Russia and Canada, large parts of it is really uninhabited. But Brazil, even in the Amazon, is inhabited. So if you take a flight from the southernmost part of Brazil and go to Amazon, it is something like 6-7 hours, traversing an entire continent. So the size. Now, Brazil, Brazilians were always telling me that there are a large number, this huge population we have. I mean, they were saying, you might remember that some years ago, there was a contest, some kind of a contest for 7 man-made wonders of the world. And every Indian teenager, certainly teenager and young people were voting many times because it was this, like the Indian Idol kind of a competition. You send SMS message or you vote with your mobile. Everybody voted so many times with their nimble fingers, so Taj Mahal became one. But when I was in Brazil, I saw everybody again pressing these buttons. So I said, what is happening? They said that we are a large number of people. We are going to make this Christ the Redeemer, this famous statue that is there in Rio de Janeiro. Some of you might have seen it. It's a big statue, man-made statue of Christ. We are going to make it one of the wonders of the world. And it did become one of the man-made wonders of the world, one of the 7 or one of the 9. So it is a very large population, again the 5th largest population in the world, and that is about 194 million, let's say approximately 200 million. So it is 1/5 of India's population, but by international standards a very large population, 5th largest as I said. Economy, both India and Brazil today are, give or take a few, let's say 10-20 million, let's say approximately $2 trillion economies. I mean, Brazil it has a higher GDP than us, but large economies. And if you were to look at the first 10 large economies in the world, both Brazil and India both figure. Particularly in the last 15 years or so, we were again among the fastest growing nations. Not only large economies, we were among the fastest growing nations. China is the fastest, let's say 9%, 9.5%. We were growing at 8%. Brazil was also growing at 5%, 6%. The last 2 years has been a different story. We have slumped, but again, not remarkable, but again, a kind of a logical parallel. Brazil has also slumped. Brazil's growth rates have also come down. So these are the brute facts: size, population, size of the economy, growth of the economy. Let us stop at that, these brute facts. More interesting than these facts are the beliefs and values and the systems that we have. And I think normally I look at them in terms of 4 Ds, the alphabet D, so 4 Ds, as in democracy, diversity, disparity, and development. And let me explain very briefly why this is interesting. Now, there are so many democratic countries in the world. Every country terms itself democratic. I mean, Pakistan regards itself as a thriving democracy, having had elections recently. But by democracy, I don't mean just elections. We are a very noisy democracy. Some people call us almost an anarchic system, but we are a very noisy democracy in which political parties are fighting with each other. The political parties, that is the executive, not the executive, the legislature, the parliament has problems with the executive, the government, and the political parties of the parliament. Both the executive and the legislature often are at loggerheads with each other. The judiciary is fiercely independent. The judiciary, as you know, in Goa now with the mining, is all the time, right or wrong, is putting obstacles, and it has its own role to play. The media is fiercely antagonistic to the government in power. So we are a vibrant, really vibrant, somewhat almost a discordant democracy. I mean, we are all Indians here, let's call ourselves that. But Brazil is the same. There are not too many countries in the world in which again you find that the government has to be a coalition government. And the government and the Supreme Court have often problems with each other. And that whatever the president is proposing is getting stalled in the parliament. And that there's a media which is doing the investigative journalism, the Helcas of Brazil, which is coming out with all these stories. So all these fun and games, and sometimes the frustrations and disappointments that you see in Indian democracy, you also see that in Brazil. Diversity. Now, we are very proud of saying, and rightly so, we are very proud of saying that there are many analogies that we use, this garland with different flowers, unity in diversity, all that is familiar to each one of you. And we are truly multilinguistic, multicultural, multi-religious, whatever other multi that you can think of, we are that. We are all the multis. Brazil is also all of that, except it is not multilinguistic. But I'll tell you one or two interesting things about the diversity of Brazil. You look at the Brazilian football team, and some of you in Goa may follow Brazilian football a little. You have people like Pelé. Pelé, of course, as you recognize, is of African origin, is black in color. And at the same time, you have in recent years somebody like Kaká, very popular figure. And you have somebody like Maier now, who is a very popular, who has gone to Barcelona. And he is neither, he is very different. And then there are people who might look like Japanese. So Brazil has a truly multiracial identity. There are people who came from all different parts of Europe, starting from East Europe to Italy, Spain. So don't think of it as really Portuguese in that sense, and I'll come to that in a moment, but as really European antecedents. But at the same time, today 50%, as much as 50% of the Brazilians trace their ancestry to Africa. Because at one point in time when Brazil needed labor for sugar, for cotton, for all these things, coffee, Brazil had the largest number of Africans brought in as slaves and from different parts of Africa. They are integrated today, but it's truly multiracial. And again, Brazil has the largest number of Japanese outside Japan, and the largest number of Lebanese, or maybe more Lebanese in Brazil than in Lebanon. All this has happened because Brazil, I will come to that, I will tell you in a minute. So it is really, in that sense, a country of enormous diversity, and that's why whenever any of you have an opportunity to go to Brazil, unless you are wearing a sari, or unless you are wearing a mundu if you are a man, which I doubt we do anymore, people will think that you are a Brazilian. And disparities, the third D that I told. Again, like India, you have the Ambanis with their skyscraper buildings, and then you have the people who are so poor in Dharavi, in Bombay or elsewhere. So there is an enormous inequality, both in terms of regions, as we have. If you were to look at Punjab or Karnataka or Maharashtra, and if you look at these as kind of, and maybe Goa too, as the more progressive regions of India, and then there have been, as you know, Bihar and Orissa, traditionally hitherto regarded as backward states. Similarly, in Brazil, there is Sao Paulo, Rio, the south and the southeast of Brazil, which are regarded as rich regions, and they are very different. I mean, some parts of Brazil really like being in Germany or being in Italy, I mean, in the south. And then you have in the northeast, there is a city called Salvador, the old capital of Brazil. If you go to the city of Salvador in Bahia, this is the largest African-looking town outside Lagos in Nigeria. The next largest concentration of black people. You really feel that you are in Africa. Then you go to some other region and you look very different. And there's a part of Sao Paulo where you feel you're in Tokyo. So it has not only regional disparities, but it also has huge income disparities between the people who live in these slums called favelas. Some of you might have seen pictures, or you might have seen all these very poor small children in Brazil, who are street urchins, just as we have in India, beggars and so on. It's set of extremely rich people who fly around in Sao Paulo with their pay. So there is an enormous disparity. Why am I telling you all this? Because I'm trying to establish my case here. There are extraordinary similarities between Brazil. And the last and the most significant is that we are both developing countries. And that means a lot. Because in the world, we are today and we will be tomorrow also, there will be a kind of a difference in approach between countries from the developed world, mainly predominantly European countries, US, Canada, Japan. We are making a transition, of course. We are making a graduation or transition. The least developed countries, the countries which are becoming very rich, including China, but still China included, we are regarded as developing countries. And the developing countries, it doesn't only depend upon income, but it depends on your level of industrialization, depends on the literacy rates, the health, the infrastructure, the standards. So in international relations, in economic thinking, there is a distinction to be made between the views and perspectives of a developed world and that of the developing world. And we are a part of the developing world. And therefore, I think there are all these kinds of commonalities between Brazil and India, which is why, as both the Aparajita and Nandini Sahai pointed out earlier, India and Brazil are in so many things together. Overall, if you look at the world today and if you think of middle powers, aspiring powers, you would call them, or emerging powers, or whatever. Some people use the word regional power, some people say potential powers. What is power and how is power changing is another discussion in itself. But invariably, those of you who follow the news, in the last few years, in the last 5 years, people have been saying that there are the developed countries, there are a large number of other countries, but there are countries like China, first of all, Brazil, India, sometimes Turkey, Indonesia, Mexico. These are the kind of aspiring powers, or powers which are changing or acquiring more power, whose profile, whose characteristics are changing. And in this, because China is not a democracy, Turkey is a different kind of a democracy, Brazil and India are always together in all these blocks or groupings, whether under the UN or in another framework or even in journalistic writing. Anytime you hear China, Brazil and India, India, Brazil and China, Brazil and India are always together. There are all these commonalities. Are they very completely similar then? No, there are profound differences. And I think before I proceed any further, I should tell you one or two profound differences. Like India, we have many neighbors. And I am not giving you a secret, conveying a secret when I tell you, or when you believe, and I listen to you, that we have problems with many of our neighbors. I mean, it's not because of our own doing, but that's another lecture, and I think Ambassador Parsarthi did that recently. But we have problems with many of our neighbors. Brazil also has 9 neighbors, as many as 9 neighbors. So the biggest difference is that they don't have problems with anybody. And this is again another topic, but for reasons of history and for reasons of statesmanship. Not now, going back a century ago, or even 2 centuries ago when they settled all their borders, whether it is Argentina, or Bolivia, or Peru, or they have all these, Venezuela, which is a difficult neighbor, they have a very benign security environment. They don't have neighbors. Second big difference is Brazil is really resource rich, whether it is land or water, and these are very important resources in the world, because oil is not the only important resource. If you have water, if you have land, if you have minerals, and then Brazil has petroleum too. While, as you know, most of you know, we need resources from outside. We still have only 70%, 80% capacity in regard to petroleum products. Water is going to be one of our biggest challenges. Land has reached a saturation point. Brazil, there is plenty of land to feed the whole world. So there are these big differences. But the commonalities I have told you already. If there is all this that is common between us, and if also at one point in time our trajectories almost crossed in history, why is it that I am saying adding content to cordiality, by which I really mean that we are still adding, we are beginning to add some content to this relationship. I am also suggesting that the relationship had cordiality. We were always friends, but without content. You know, you can be friends with somebody, doesn't mean that you're engaged with somebody. I am putting it to you that we had this relationship without much content. So why did that happen? I think in Goa, some of you may be familiar with it, but as you know, Vasco da Gama landed here in 1498 and was the first European, really the first European to land in India, and European so-called colonial process started with that in 1498. 2 years later, exactly 2 years later, in 1500, a person called Cabral also was looking for India. He was a friend or a rival of Vasco da Gama. He was also trying to find a route to India, and he landed up on the coast of a completely unknown land till then to the Europeans. This was the eastern coast of Brazil. So, almost the same point in time, in search of the same goal, India. So, this discovery of Vasco da Gama and Cabral almost ran parallel. But what is fascinating, and some of you students and scholars may know this, what is fascinating is that it was a completely different process. I mean, if you read the letters that were sent by the first Portuguese sailors when they landed in Calicut and went to or taken to Zamorin, you know, if you recall, they were there and then the Zamorin would not see them. When the Portuguese and the Vasco da Gama landed in India, there was the entire thousands of years of Indian history and civilization behind India. We had fine textiles, jewelry, music, the entire tradition and weight of Indian philosophy, the Darshana system. We had all that. And therefore, I think the Zamorin was virtually dismissive of the presence that Vasco da Gama brought. You might remember, some of you might remember this, you know, the feathers and the beads and all that. And the Portuguese description of the sailors at that time was the land, which was enormously wealthy and civilized and refined and all that. Of course, the Portuguese had the habit that whenever their ships came, along with the sailors also came the priest. So they always brought the cross. And they realized very soon that this is not an easy, because there's an entire legacy of the Indian religions by then, not only Hinduism but also Islam. Now when you read the descriptions of what happened to Cabral, very different. It's unbelievable that 500, 600 years ago, these sailors land and in Bahia and in those parts, and they encountered completely naked people, handsome. These are the indigenous people of Brazil, and it is estimated that there were as few, I think the estimates vary between 2 to 5 million, I don't know what figure Aparajita has, but 2 to 5 million, not more than that. I mean, huge continent full of forests and so on, very few people, and they came to the coast, they were extremely friendly in receiving all these sailors. They were very impressed with what the Portuguese had brought, simple things, and you know, they were all, as I said, they were in the state of nature, good looking, and soon Brazil, of course, like Spain in the other part of South America, they were only really looking for gold, silver, precious metals. They didn't find that immediately. They only found forests and wood and so on. That was the beginning of the process of the Portuguese colonization in Brazil. But I would say that in a historical sense, it's interesting that, you know, in India, the Portuguese coming in here started at the same time, but then, you know, it took a different turn in India. I wanted to go into that, and later on the British and so on and so forth. But in the Portuguese, in Brazil, it's just a fact, an accidental fact of history, that the Portuguese were the first to come, but were also able to consolidate, because later on the Dutch and the others, the French, they all tried to come for various reasons. Again, I won't go into that. I think the Portuguese brought in slaves from elsewhere, and other Europeans came. But let me just make this point, it's a bit of a digression. The Brazilians generally don't regard themselves as having been colonized. They don't regard Portuguese as the colonial power and have all these discussions about post-colonialism and all the academic terms that you use about the impact of colonialism on history related. They don't, because Portugal is such a small country, and they were really never colonized. And then there are other aspects of history. Some years later, Napoleon came and attacked Portugal. So the Portuguese king, some of you may know that they ran away from Portugal and they came to Rio, they came to Brazil, and the seat of the empire in that way, in that sense, became Brazil. So all of whatever was Portugal was being really ruled for a time from Brazil. So supposing Queen Victoria or somebody had to come and seek shelter in the Mughal court, and Delhi was the seat of the British Empire, then we also won't talk so much about post-colonialism and how the all aspects of our national ethos has been affected by the British forever. So it's a similar kind of thing. They don't have those worries about post-colonialism because they're so much bigger in size and in the heritage, the history. But what I wanted to tell you is really that there was this point in time where our history, the trajectory of our histories came together. So that was the first contact. Because what happened then, and particularly it's most fascinating, particularly from Goa, because here the Portuguese settled down, as you know very well. Then some of these governors, people who had been governors here, started going as governors or agents or governor generals to Brazil because it was the Portuguese empire. So I found it very interesting, and these are all completely under-researched because for various reasons. I don't know, I think it is under-researched, but maybe there are scholars. I think Sanjay Subramanian is one. But there are people who know these roots. But there are, imagine in Brazil, there are all these mines, gold mines and so on, which they had found. The ruling class of Europeans, the Portuguese really, they are the elite. The working class, the miners, are the Africans, because Brazil, the Brazil native Indians as they're called, or indigenous people, were not really doing that kind of work. They were very small in number. But who are the people who are building the churches? Who are the artisans? They were people who had been taken from India. And when you go actually to some of these churches, there are these old cities near Minas Gerais, and some of these churches, you find that there are things which the Europeans didn't know at all, which are part of the Indian iconography. I don't want to give you examples here, but there are things which you only see in an Indian temple or an Indian church, which these craftsmen had acquired, and they carried it to Brazil. But nobody in Brazil knew this, and it was not recorded, and the Portuguese would not allow these things to be really written because they didn't want this alien influence to be showing in the records. So there are all those kinds of historical connections, but again without really any content. Then we come to, let's say, contemporary period, by which I mean not so contemporary, but let's say India's independence and the liberation of Goa. When India became independent, Brazil had been independent for a long time, I think from 1822, because I think the Portuguese left. Brazil first was an independent country and then it became a republic, all that. Brazil had been independent for a long time, but when India became independent, of course, Nehru, and then Brazil had its leader. Everything was very friendly. Brazil was a well-established nation. India was a new nation, but both believed in the process of decolonization. Both knew that we were developing countries, so there was a bit of beginnings of friendship, beginnings of cordiality. But then came 1961, and then came the liberation of Goa. And here, Brazil, for no real reason, as their scholars would discover it, they kind of on a default drive, automatically they sided with Portugal. And they were representing, the diplomatic relations have been open, they were representing Portugal. But when the liberation actually happened, instead of perhaps thinking through, because they were, they were not really beholden to Portugal in any way, but instead of completing or accepting the decolonization process, they thought that what India was doing was completely wrong. So that cast a spell for a while, again till maybe the 1970s. So again, after 20 years, after 15, 20 years, 1961, the liberation of Goa, and then Brazil and India did not enjoy a good relationship. Then let's look at very broadly the period from 70s to 2000. During this period, I think we started coming together mainly under the UN. And that is for all the reasons that I outlined to you from the beginning. I think we have kind of same worldview, such developing countries, somebody who believes in decolonization, who believes in the transfer, official development assistance. There are many strands to the attempts to create a new international economic order, as it was called in the UN. It was being negotiated with regard to trade under GATT, or in other forms, in other organizations, the UN, about transfer of technology, transfer of wealth, in a very rudimentary way, rules of trade, commodities, all that. And generally, both India and Brazil were working together in the multilateral forum. And therefore, I want to call this cordial phase, but really again without much bilateral contact. And now I come to the present part, which really has started happening in this century. And so therefore in the last 12 years. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, these things happen gradually, but I would put it to you that really I think we are acquiring content in our relationship and started looking at each other seriously only in the last 12, 13 years. And how and what led to this? So to simplify matters, I would say that much of this happened since this President Lula, let's just call him President Lula. There's a long name, Luis Inácio Lula, but we just call him Lula. He came to power. Now he is a kind of a very different personality, not only in Brazil, but in world politics. Because Brazil, as I told you, is a country in which there was a kind of a political elite. For long periods, there were military dictators, there were generals, not very harsh, but it was ruled by generals. But other times, it was a bit like political dynasties in India, which they still have. I mean, these were all, sons of governors, or sons of presidents who were contesting, and they were all from elite universities in Rio and then in France or in Spain. So they were Western oriented, Western educated, from large feudal landowning families, or some from industrial classes. So it was an elitist class. And their center of the world, their orientation was really to Europe. I think the country that they admired most was France, not Portugal for the reasons I explained. Portugal was just there, a small country. But France, because where do you send your son for education? You want him to be truly a gentleman or a lady, then you send him to France. And if you're not France, then Italy. So it was not US, it was not UK. To this day, it continues to some extent. So art, music, intellectual fervor, everything came from Europe, and everything really started with France. So that was the orientation. So in this kind of a thing, Lula comes. Now Lula is a fascinating figure. He comes from a family with a very abusive father who used to beat up the wife and the children a lot. There were 8 children. They were thoroughly impoverished. And Lula, one of the younger children, he ran away to Sao Paulo, and he didn't go to any school. He was a shoe-shine boy. I mean, Lula is now about 65 years old. So I'm not talking about the history of someone like Gandhi or someone a legendary old established figure. This is still an evolution of a political personality in process. But all this he did as a shoe-shine boy. Then something about which he is very proud. Then he got a job in the Volkswagen factory. And then when he was working on a lathe, one of his fingers got cut off. So he has only 4 fingers, and he wears this thing as a badge of honor. So Lula, coming from a very backward region originally, coming from an extremely poor family, and very conscious of the poverty in Brazil, of the workers in Brazil, of the African heritage of Brazil, came and I think to some extent brought a new look to Brazil. And therefore, I regard him as a transformative character in Brazilian society and Brazilian politics. But in terms of foreign policy and in terms of India, Lula again changed something there also. So as I was telling you, you had all these, the previous president before Lula, a very eminent professor of sociology, Silvio Cardoso, very well-known professor of sociology, but steeped in classics and very sophisticated, very articulate, slightly pro-business and so on. But Lula comes and he believes that 50% of the people came from Africa. What have we done in Africa? We don't even have a relationship with 20 African countries. So that was one. Second thing is that by then, fortunately, Brazil was also becoming rich, relatively rich, because I think the commodity, China, which changes everything in the world, China needed everything that Brazil could sell: sugar, soya, animal feed, poultry, whatever. I think Brazil is number one in many of these things. The world's largest sugar producer, number one in beef, or number two in chicken. These things. And China was a huge market, so Brazil was becoming richer for a number of these reasons. So then there is this feeling that why should we not? We are large countries: China, India. Mexico is different, I mean, for different reasons, but China, India, Indonesia, we are large countries, but at the same time we are slightly progressed countries. So why don't we have this solidarity? So Lula got interested in India. At the same time, there was this feeling that in all these negotiations that we have in the world, we just don't have capacity. You know, the G77, this is the grouping of all the developing countries, there are some 120 of them. We go for a negotiation on, let's say, on trade or with the IMF. And you know, these West, they have all these think tanks and there are so many institutes and so on, and become fully prepared. Here in the developing world, most of these countries, some of them don't even have universities. Very few of them have think tanks. Not every country is like, in the developing world, is like India, with a certain intellectual capacity. So it's not only the financial capital, you also need a kind of an intellectual capital to engage seriously. Another 5 minutes? Okay. So they said that no, we must really engage together, and this was the beginning of a grouping of countries called India, Brazil and South Africa, IPSA as it is called. And these countries came together, and Lula comes on a first visit to India in 2002, and I have seen some of this myself. Now Lula is this trade union fighter who really is a poor man, who self-educated and very exuberant, embraces everybody and kisses everybody on both cheeks, that kind of a personality. And we have our Prime Minister, whom you all know, a great scholar, very reticent, very reserved, and who is not really the embracing type. But they hit off very well. They hit off extremely well, and that is because both of them have this one belief, and that is of inclusive growth. First of all, we should grow, our economy should grow, but growth alone is not enough. There should be distributive justice also. And this is the underlying fact in both countries, because both have poverty, both have to have these social benefit programs and so on. So they hit off very well. So to summarize the political side of the equation of adding content, in the last 10 years, Lula came thrice. Dilma Rousseff, the current president, she is a lady, she is again a very tough fighter. She came twice. Prime Minister of India went thrice to Brazil, two during my own time. And at many other levels, whether it is the foreign minister or science and technology or commerce or trade, at the political level, we have a lot of interest and engagement. It has really grown. The awareness about each other, about our profile, about the interest has really grown, which is very satisfying, which really is the reason why these kinds of what we are having today, this kind of interest in Brazil has also grown. They have departments in India, departments in Brazil and so on. So I think in terms of the political goodwill, I think it has improved a lot. What about the economic and commercial? I think this, we have made a beginning, and in absolute terms, it has been quite a significant growth. I think in 2002, trade was something like $800 billion, and today it is over $10 billion. Now, $10 billion is not to be sniffed at, but it's not very large either. You know, if you really look at India's relationship with China, for instance, or with many other countries, it's a very small figure. But I think more than the trade, the real opportunity with Brazil and with India is in the larger economic linkages. Let me just say a few sentences about it. Because trade is import and export, as you know. But Brazil, India, as it grows and as our population continues to grow, as our demand continues to grow, we need everything. Already, for instance, for pulses, we have a shortage. Now, Brazil is the largest sugar producer, as I said, in the world. India is the largest consumer. We also grow a lot of sugar. But if we have a shortfall in sugar, sugar prices shoot up. Brazil is the natural supply. Similarly, many other agricultural commodities, Brazil has the capacity to be a major exporter. Similarly, with regard to mining and minerals, because our appetite both for China and India will continue to grow, and there are enormous opportunities for those areas. But at the same time, Brazil also needs services. The entire almost 70-80% of Brazilian pharmaceuticals, what is happening in biotechnology, all that has been led by India. Because I think our areas of strength, as you know, are in information technology, in health services, in pharma products, and these kinds of things. So there are enormous opportunities for India as well. So I think if you were to look at the economic content, which would be energy, agriculture, mining, services, science and technology, these are some of the areas. We have added content. I don't have the time to give you many details, but let me give you just one or two examples. In India, the Tatas were building, have had buses for a long time, but they didn't have a bodybuilding plant. Whatever kind of a chassis was built in, they were using it. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. And then Mr. Ratan Tata saw that in Brazil, there is this plant which really is very good. Invested $400 billion, they bought some sugar plants. So whenever there is a shortage in India, they have their plants in Brazil. They got huge refining plants in India. So these kinds of synergies are developed. Let me say a word or two about culture and people-to-people contacts, because these are also very, very important. I think we are beginning to see, really as I speak, we are beginning to see in the last few years kind of an interest in each other's culture. It started happening mainly because I don't have the time, unfortunately, to tell you, but during my time there was a Brazilian novela. Novelas is like the soap opera, something like Ekta Kapoor's. Typically, it's like Ekta Kapoor, but it runs longer, runs almost for a year. And these are enormously popular in Brazil, almost everybody sees it. So the writer, the Brazilian equivalent of Ekta Kapoor, a person called Gloria Perez, she started doing one theme based on India. And this is called Caminos dos Indias. This became so popular. Actually, I must tell you this story. I will take a minute or so. When I was going to Brazil, I was told that this big novella is going to come and everybody will know about India. You are very lucky to be going as a master. So I reached Brazil and I asked the people, what is this story? So when I heard the story, my heart sank. Because they said the story is that there is this very beautiful Kshatriya girl who is in love with this Dalit boy, and therefore all kinds of obstacles come, and they of course we want to explore the entire Indian caste system through this thing, and then she ultimately commits sati, and finally her body flows up the Ganges. Every cliche that you can think of India had been put in that story. So I said, my God, it's going to be terrible for me, because I've done this kind of press work and all, and I know how difficult it is. Then I said, let me come and see the studio, and they were already ready with their sets and all. So when I went to the studios, there was a company called Globo. I actually went there. When I saw the studios, I was a little puzzled, because even the poorest of the people, the servants, the Dalits and the untouchables, they were all kind of living in small palaces on the sets actually. The way they had constructed, they were all exquisitely dressed in silk and nice salwar kameezas and with turbans and so on. So I said, if this is the Brazilian view of Indian poverty, all right. Visually not too bad, I can live it. But then what to do with this entire story? Then slowly we started making friends with this writer, because it's like the the story keeps changing at the shoot. And we started telling them that, look, because they were looking at everything in terms of visual content. So the sets were all right, but we said, why don't you introduce one theory? All Indian women are not really depressed or oppressed. They're not all the time crying. We invited her home. I said, look at my wife. My wife is a very tough woman. So I said, show somebody a different kind of thing. An Indian, we talked about Kiran Bedi. So they introduced the character of an Indian pirate, pirate who is a leader. And then this caste thing was bothering me. But then every role had to be performed only by Brazilian, because it was all in Portuguese. So then the so-called boy who is very poor, from the most disadvantaged, he's a Hulk, very handsome Brazilian actor, exquisitely dressed and so on. And the story was developing like this. He gets so frustrated in the process that then he runs away, and he's a software engineer, a sophisticated software engineer. And finally he lands up in Rio. And in Rio, so I think connection between India, because half of it is shot in India, half of it is in Rio. So he falls in love with a very beautiful Brazilian girl, but then there is the attraction of the Indian girl. Meanwhile, the Indian girl has fallen in love through a camcorder with a Brazilian boy. So all the whole families are coming together. So I said, this is all right, we can live it. Meanwhile, the ministry, I took one risk. I said, I'm not going to tell about the storyline to the ministry. Because the last thing that we need is asking permission for shooting and all. We helped them in every way. Through the Bollywood, through all the songs that they wanted. And that really helped. Because as it evolved, slowly we were able to get all these things dropped. The sati scene and the bodies on the Ganges and the small child marrying. Because they were really interested in any interesting story you tell them. And with some cliches. So it was a fascinating experience. Anyway, so I think on the cultural connect, and one thing that I realized through this story is that I dealt with press in Germany and other places. The Brazilians have an empathy for India. It's not an advanced, rich country. They, even when you look at the poor people or whatever problems India has, there is certain sympathy, there is certain empathy for it. And there is an understanding, yes, that this is an exotic culture, it's a different culture. And they have great respect for all the things that are to be respected in India, the yoga, the Upanishads and the religions, and St. Francis, everything. All that we have, they respect that. I think we are beginning to get interested in Brazil. I think the popular images of Brazil, as you all know, still first of all of football, and second the carnival, then the beaches, and for some of you the models, Bunchen, Gisela Bunchen, all that. But now I think some of these girls have also started coming into Bollywood. So I think we will see more and more people as models. So I think this people-to-people awareness is growing. So I think since I've spoken for much longer than I intended, let me put this to you. I think it is important for a country like India and also for a country like Brazil to be interested in other countries which are relevant but which are not necessarily great powers. Not all of foreign policy and diplomacy is about war and peace and nuclear energy and borders and water. These are the critical issues. But there are countries in the world with whom we can have a natural bond. And the world is changing, as you all know, and I think it's a cliche almost. It's a multipolar world. It is not just that everything starts in Washington or that everything ends with Beijing. It's now many more things are happening. So in that context, in a city like this, in a state like this, with a certain long-standing interest or curiosity about it, it's really very heartening to note that there is a department for Latin American Studies and International Relations. I think it's a very imaginative step. They have established some linkages already, Parashta and you and the colleagues. There are others. The fact that all of you have come here today is again indicates for me the same thing. So this is a growing process. We need to do more on the Brazilian side also, which we are doing. And therefore, to sum up, I think the Foreign Minister of Brazil, Amorim, once said that the partnership between Brazil and India, or India and Brazil, is both natural and necessary. I think it's natural for all the reasons that I told you. We are natural partners. It's also necessary because in the world you need friends who think alike, similar kinds of profiles, similar kinds of interests. In India and Brazil working together, we have been able to do some things in climate change, biodiversity, with regard to the NPT, though slightly differ slightly, with regard to all these kinds of issues. And therefore, it is also necessary for the good of the world, for the restructuring of the world, that we remain partners. I am really very impressed by your very patient listening. I was a little apprehensive that as I started, I said, why Brazil? But you didn't seem to mind, so thank you.
Floor is open now for questions.
Just thought that before the students take some time to settle down, I ask. First of all, I must compliment you for a very, very lucid presentation. presentation. I mean, of course, all of us are at different levels fascinated with Brazil, but I think the very comprehensive picture that you put, I think the interest has got reignited very much. In fact, my question would be linked up to both the presentations that were done. Ms. Ganguly, with regard to the role that public diplomacy division has, and how in these times of crisis, when the so-called euphoria about everything being very positive about globalization and everything emerging, I think this is the best time perhaps for countries like India and Brazil to look at the world through the prism of what it means to them particularly, and therefore perhaps a lot of scope for them to be part of kind of a new consciousness of the South. I was very happy when you used the term that India and Brazil are developing countries. You did not start off with emerging or rising, because that's the discourse we've got used to for the last several years. So I think this is the right time to take a realistic assessment of where countries like India and Brazil stand. And that's where I think the role of public diplomacy division becomes all the more. I think when the going was probably very good, we just didn't need, there were already so much being said about India. So in that sense, I think the thematic is very well placed. And I'm very happy that you've taken on kind of an academic role for yourself now. You are at the Jamia. I'm sure Appraisal will get you to Goa University more often. My query would be that the kind of global scenario we find ourselves in, India and Brazil are likely to have a number of convergences on many international issues. And also there will be positions of, say, divergences, whether it's WTO or other matters. Do you think there is still a possibility for a coalition of the South? I mean, not of the G77 kind, but also not which is something very exclusive like BRICS or IPSA, to perhaps start renegotiating on their own terms. So how do you look at the need for a new context of South-South cooperation in that sense?
No, thank you for your question. I think the last part of what you said is really important in this question. And it's a big question. And I think, honestly, I think that it's changing, everything is evolving. Now when we talk of the South, there is a differentiation, like Singapore was also regarded as a developing country. And in what sense is it a developing country? I mean, it's a member of the OECD already. Mexico is certainly a part of the South, a developing country, but it has also joined the OECD. South Korea, I mean, till the other day it was a developing country, but today not only its profile but its interests are also that it's comparable to France and Germany. So I think the gradation among developing countries is deepening and is becoming more definitive in a sense. Both India and Brazil in their self-consciousness are very clearly developing countries. That's one. There's another kind of a challenge, and that is with regard to when we say South, the agendas are very different. Like for instance, there is an agenda on international trade, there is a different agenda on development finance, and there is a completely different agenda maybe with regard to climate change. Now the biggest area of divergence, as you perhaps know, between India and Brazil is in the area of trade, particularly agriculture. Because Brazil is a very big agricultural exporter, and that's why I think the WTO negotiations of our paths diverged. So in the real world, at the ideological level, at the rhetorical level, at the political level, there is this idea of the solidarity of the South. But in the actual negotiations, at the operational level, I think many times the things diverge. So I think I would say that one has to be hard-headed about it, one has to be realistic. But at the same time, I think the greatest value in our countries coming together would be in what I hinted at. Now, countries like, let's just take India, Brazil, South Africa, and let's say China. on any difficult issue, if our scholars, if our researchers come together, our universities come together, some of this we are doing under BRICS, our bankers come together. Now they have an agenda which is clearly different from the agenda of the G8. This idea of the BRICS bank, which we are still talking about, or the idea of some kind of a special trading mechanism between BRICS countries, these are doable. Because I think you might be able to find convergence of interest in a very real sense with regard to swap trade or some other kind of trade mechanism. So I think we have reached a stage where I think our interests are so evolved and definitive, we at the same time our capabilities. So I don't see us going back to the glory days of the South with S capital in that sense. We may still talk about it. We may still talk about South, and so on. But in the real world, it is on each issue, what is the coalition of interest that will come. That is the way I see it as a practitioner of diplomacy.
Doing my MA at Center for Latin American Studies, Goa University. My question is, so as we know that the next Olympics is due in 2016, in the city of Rio de Janeiro. So I want to know in what way can India use this event as an opportunity to add content to cordiality?
Thank you very much, because I should have mentioned it, but of course there's the World Cup next year. That's also a very big event, though we have never qualified for the World Cup. But it's a huge event in 2014, and then the Olympics. I must think about it really, because when the Olympics were announced, even the World Cup was announced, Olympics were announced, several Indian companies wrote to me. I was still the ambassador, saying that they are interested in some subcontracting opportunity or in event management, something or the other. Can we get a small share of this large pot? Today, these things are very sophisticated in the world. For instance, just to give you a flavor, the day Olympics was announced, what is one of the biggest challenges for Brazil in Olympics, apart from everything else? It is the management of the security. Because Brazilians just don't have any security consciousness. You can walk into the president's office, at most there will be one metal detector. So they have never had any rebellion or insurgency, not even until recently, so they had some strikes, but they don't understand terrorism. When I go and talk to them about terrorism and all the horrible things that happen to us, sometimes I felt that I'm behaving like a man who's come from a different planet, because they just don't understand these things. But Olympics, everybody is going to come, the Israeli athletes and all the whoever it is from Qatar and so on, so they were worried. So in the first week after it had been announced, I saw the Israeli security experts coming and getting big contracts, because who are the bigger experts? These are commercial deals. Then the Brits came, the Germans came, they had their own horror in the Munich Olympics many years ago. So I think it's a very sophisticated world. I guess there are opportunities in some terms of contracting and so on. And I think going back to the question raised by the gentleman, if there are people who speak Portuguese and Hindi, and Portuguese and English, I guess in terms of volunteers and so on, there will be opportunities. I don't know. That has to be explored. But when I was thinking about this language, I must tell you there's one of the bright Indian IT guys who was doing some project in Brazil. He said, it's a translation not required. It will all be completely irrelevant to have these young boys and girls who will be able to translate. So I said, why? Then he took out his mobile and he said, we will only be using this. And then he said by 2016 the Olympics come, most of the standard phrase books, how do I go to the stadium, which train do I take, then where do I have a vegetarian, can I get a vegetarian, all this you can just do it with your mobile in 50 languages, you don't have to speak to anybody. The cab drivers also will have this thing. Let us see whether it happens.
So you spoke about content of cordiality, right? So they're on the same page. But just a couple of years ago, Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, they came out with this hugely successful ultralight helicopter. And Brazil being one of the nations that decided to actually buy it. So I'm asking a very specific question here, but if you can't answer, it doesn't matter. But Do you have any idea of what happened to those proposals later? Did they actually come through?
Which helicopter?
The ultralight helicopter.
What's it called?
Dhruv.
No, I know that some other Latin American countries have bought it, but not in Brazil. Not in Brazil, but I don't know the details. But you know that some countries have bought it, right? In the neighborhood. Brazil's neighborhood.
Thank you so much. I think we've had a very interesting and informative talk, and this whole thing, it's so interesting for even the layperson that we feel like going to Brazil. Thank you. And just as a little token of appreciation, I would like to thank Ambassador Prakash, both Royal